One of Felix Mendelssohn's most extraordinary compositions, his String Quartet No. 6 in F minor, is inextricably linked to the profound personal and artistic relationship he enjoyed with his elder sister Fanny. It was a kinship fostered by their intellectual brilliance, their passion for music, and a deep mutual affection. Fanny's talents as a pianist and as a composer were as prodigious as her brother's. The originality of the music she wrote during her formative years was said to surpass that of Felix's more consistently polished works. Felix sought Fanny's counsel in musical matters well into adulthood, and she would remain his alter ego, a voice of calm and wisdom that was a balm to his sensitive, highly strung personality. Although Fanny composed almost 500 works during her lifetime, the cultural conventions of the 19th century dictated that a career in music was not an option, a point that was driven home in a letter she received from her father Abraham when she was 15. What you wrote to me about your musical occupations with reference to and in comparison with Felix was both rightly thought and expressed. Music will perhaps become his profession, while for you it can and must only be an ornament, never the root of your being and doing. On her birthday 8 years later, he expressed his thoughts even more bluntly. You must prepare more earnestly and eagerly for your real calling, the only calling of a young woman, the state of a housewife. Such reactionary attitudes were particularly pronounced in Germany, where the notion that a woman's role should be limited to the 3 Ks, Kinder, Küche, Kirche, children, kitchen, church, was prevalent well into the 20th century. In spite of the disruption in Felix and Fanny's relationship that was an inevitable outgrowth of their marriages, Felix's frequent touring, and his relocation to Leipzig, they remained close through a voluminous correspondence in which they provided each other with news and advice on a broad range of artistic and personal matters. Although Felix responded to Fanny's attempts to have her music published with an ambivalence that was likely informed by his innate conservatism and a desire to respect his father's wishes, his affection for her tended to erode his resistance. This muddled attitude sometimes produced amusing results. In an effort to avoid defying his father, while at least partially gratifying Fanny's wishes, Felix arranged to have 6 of her songs published under his name. But in one famous instance, this idea backfired, as Fanny related in a letter to her husband Wilhelm Hensel. Felix wrote a very funny letter today, in which he describes in detail his farewell audience with Queen Victoria. Prince Albert played the organ, and the Queen sang a song Felix had presented that particularly pleased her. In fact, it was Schöner und Schöner, which he then felt obliged to admit was my property. The whole description will amuse you very much. But in May of 1847, tragedy struck. While leading a rehearsal of Felix's oratorio The First Walpurgis Night, Fanny suddenly collapsed, the victim of a stroke. Within hours, she was dead. When Felix received the news, he shrieked and then collapsed. His devastation was so complete that he couldn't bring himself to attend Fanny's funeral. In a letter to his younger sister Rebecca, he wrote, "God help us all. I don't know what else to say and think. God help us. God help us. The only thing that helps a little is to cry a lot. If only one could do that all the time. Alas, dear sister, I can't write or think about anything except Fanny. It will never be otherwise as long as we're here on earth." Felix soon fell into a deep depression. At his wife's urging, he took their family to the Swiss Alps for the summer, hoping that he'd eventually regain his emotional equilibrium. It was there that Mendelssohn wrote his 6th string quartet, which would become his last completed work. He is said to have referred to the quartet as a requiem for Fanny, and in this regard, his choice of F minor as the work's key is significant. Among 19th century German musicians, F minor was the key that was most closely associated with inconsolable mourning. A well-known treatise of the time described F minor as evocative of deep depression, funereal lament, groans of misery, and longing for the grave. And Mendelssohn's use of F minor in 3 of the quartet's 4 movements has a relentless quality. In tone and content, the piece is unlike any of his other major works. The restraint and classical distance that characterized his particular form of Romanticism is almost completely abandoned here, replaced by almost constant rhythmic and harmonic instability and frequent expressions of sheer rage. Mendelssohn returned to his home in Leipzig in early September to resume his duties as conductor of the Gewandhaus Orchestra and as director of the conservatory. But he was a shattered man. Chronic overwork had undermined his health for years, and Fanny's death may have been the final blow. On November 4th, he suffered a series of strokes and died. His F minor quartet was premiered in 1848, upon the first anniversary of his death. It remains as a living monument to a profound human bond and a compelling testimony to the depth of its loss.